Live from the world headquarters of RT America in Washington, D.C., this is the news with Rick Sanchez with special host Michelle Greenstein.
Good evening, I'm Michelle Greenstein filling in for Rick Sanchez. As we know, the new Wuhan coronavirus has reached at least 14 countries and infected close to 3,000 people. Today, Chinese officials announced that 25 additional deaths exist, raising the death toll from this infection to 106. And researchers in Hong Kong say that the actual number of those affected could be more than 30 times higher than the official tally. Now, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention says it has confirmed 5 cases of the virus in the U.S. so far, and the State Department is recommending that Americans avoid travel to China when at all possible. Now, imagine that there's an entity that just gave $10 million to containing this outbreak. Sounds great, right? $5 million to China and $5 million to the continent of Africa. Sounds innocent enough. But imagine that the head of this organization has actually been warning that the next pandemic disease is coming and that it will be a global killer. And that this man, while he was the wealthiest man on earth, issued a call for a global militarized authority capable of responding to an outbreak just like this one, and that it should work with NATO to do so. Imagine he said, quote, "The world needs to prepare for pandemics in the same serious way it prepares for war." Now, imagine that in 2010, this same entity funded a trial of a malaria vaccine and administered the treatment to thousands of infants in Africa, and that the trial resulted in 151 deaths and caused serious adverse effects like paralysis and seizures in over 1,000 children. What if that entity funded a vaccine campaign in Chad as well, where unconfirmed reports allege that 50 children who were forcibly vaccinated for meningitis were paralyzed? And what if, in India, a large-scale study funded by this entity caused adolescent girls to die after being given injections of the human papilloma virus vaccine? Everything I've said so far is true about the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And that wealthy man in question, of course, that's Bill Gates. Maybe this is something to consider when you're reading headlines about how the Gates Foundation is pledging money to fight the coronavirus. And not only is it pledging money in China and in Africa to contain the virus, it's also involved in finding a cure. It's funding an effort by a company called Moderna to develop a coronavirus vaccine. And Moderna, well, it's one of those biotech stocks that have been soaring since this outbreak. We'll be staying on top of this story for you, so stay tuned. This is the news with Rick Sanchez, where we believe it's time to do news again. Here's the list of the questions we think you'll be asking tomorrow. Is a global 5G rollout inevitable? And if so, what are the potential consequences? Who was excluded from the so-called deal of the century? And why are French firefighters taking to the streets? Let's get started. Earlier this month, an appeals court in Italy ruled that a telecom worker who had developed a tumor in his ear got that tumor from using his mobile phone. It's the 6th time an Italian court has affirmed a causal link between brain tumors and cell phone use. So what we're going to do now is discuss this case with Daphne Tachover. She's an attorney with the Children's Health Defense, which is leading the nation's battle against the wireless industry. She also led a Supreme Court case in Israel, which led to the first limitations on Wi-Fi use in schools worldwide. Thanks for coming. Now, let's talk about the precedent that this sets. This court in turn, Italy, said that the studies that were provided by the defense, right, which said that there was no causal link, were mostly funded by the wireless industry itself and should therefore be given less weight. How significant is this precedent?
Well, it is significant, but it's not the first case. It's actually the Italian Supreme Court that already established the same findings in 2011 or 2012. So this is, as you said, the 6th court that confirmed the same findings. There is a causal link between cell phone use and cancer. And actually, the type of cancer that telecom employee had, it's called acoustic neuroma, which is a tumor that is being developed on the hearing nerve. Our own government, the the National Toxicology Program, it's our expert agency in deciding what is toxic, conducted a $30 million study, 10-year study, funded by the by the Food and Drug Administration. The results of this study came out on November 1st, 2018, and they found clear evidence that this radiation is causing cancer. What's interesting is the type of cancer that was found to be caused by this radiation by the NTP study. It's a cancer which is developed on Schwann cells, which are cells that surround, with a cancer on the nerves that surround organ. One type of such cancer is the acoustic neuroma that was found to cause the cancer from cell phone to the telecom employee. So we have evidence, but by the way, our government, when the results came out, said that, well, that study does not apply to human. That study also found that this radiation not only causes cancer, but also breaks the DNA in the brain. And nothing that this study found is new. We had more than ample evidence of cancer and DNA damage from numerous other studies.
Now, when it comes to that National Toxicology Program study, which we have covered on this program before, like you said, it was $30 million. So it's actually the largest and most expensive study to date about the effects of wireless radiation. So why is there a discrepancy between public policy and the published peer-reviewed science? Because even an organization like the ICNIRP has actually dismissed that NTP study's findings. Like you said, they also say that that study's findings do not apply to humans. So why do you think there's such a discrepancy between the science and public policy?
Well, corporate control. Actually, the court in Italy addressed the issue of ICNIRP specifically. ICNIRP is an industry control organization that sadly the World Health Organization decided to adopt the recommendations when it's come to cell phone and wireless use. And you're not going to be surprised to learn that the World Health Organization, the head of the EMF project in the WHO, is a wireless industry-funded person. And the World Health Organization, the IARC department, which is responsible for classifying carcinogen, classified in 2012 cell phones and wireless radiation, including radiation from cell phones, cell towers, Wi-Fi, and smart meters, as a 2B carcinogen, as a possible carcinogen. And IARC decided that it's only a possible carcinogen and does not get a higher classification because while they do have enough epidemiological studies that showing a correlation between increased use of cell phones to increased rates of brain tumors, they do not have enough animal studies. So now we do have the animal study, the NTP study. There's another study which is called the Ramazzini Institute study, a study from Italy, a €6 million study that found exactly the same result as the NTP study. And nevertheless, there's no change in policy. So unfortunately, those organizations around the world that are responsible to protect public health are mitigated by corporate power and money, including the FCC in the United States government. The Federal Communications Commission is responsible to regulate this topic in the United States. The FCC is headed by Ajit Pai, who is a Verizon attorney, Brendan Carr, who has been the CTA, the Wireless Industry Lobby Association, and other members of the CTA are basically connected to the wireless industry. So those who are responsible and entrusted with protecting the health and safety of the people and the children of this country and around the world are basically controlled by corporate power and money.
Now, I want to reiterate something that you just said for our audience because it's very significant. Because a lot of people, especially in the U.S., they may not be surprised to hear that the FCC has conflicts of interest with industry. But this actually goes all the way to the top because the ICNIRP, which has been accused of conflicts of interest in the past, and which this Turin court actually affirmed again, has conflicts of interest, is actually the entity that's setting these so-called safety guidelines that the UN's World Health Organization adopts. So that's very significant. Now, you're bringing a lawsuit against the FCC to expose its disregard for public health. What can you tell us about that?
Correct. So in the United States, the FCC, although it is not a health agency, was appointed by Congress in 1996 to regulate the health and safety of wireless technology. Clearly, it failed. Already in 1996, when they adopted those guidelines, they were already obsolete. In 2012, the General Accountability Office in Congress said that it makes no sense that the FCC did not review its guidelines for 17 years. So in 2013, the FCC opened a docket for public comment, and on December 4th, 2019, that docket was closed, and the FCC announced that there's no evidence that this radiation is harmful and there's no need for review. By February 3rd, we have to submit a lawsuit against the FCC. This is the first opportunity in 23 years that we get to sue the FCC and the government for its fraud on the people on wireless harms. So we'll bring this lawsuit, and we hope to get the public support. We are looking for donations. Please go to Children's Health Defense website, choose Stop 5G, and help us bring this lawsuit against the government. Thank you.
U.S. President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have unveiled what they are calling a peace agreement that will make history. Of course, the meeting involved no Palestinian leaders, but this comes as both leaders face a number of political and legal obstacles. RT's Rachel Blevins has the latest.
President Trump announced his deal of the century plan for peace in the Middle East today during a press conference with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, as part of that plan, Trump claims that the U.S. could recognize Palestine as a state, but only if it agrees to Israel's conditions.
I want this deal to be a great deal for the Palestinians. It has to be. Today's agreement is a historic opportunity for the Palestinians to finally achieve an independent state of their very own. After 70 years of little progress, this could be the last opportunity they will ever have.
The deal, which was reportedly written by Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, would recognize Jewish settlements in the West Bank as Israeli land, while putting a 4-year freeze on new settlements. It would also provide a pathway to statehood for Palestine under certain conditions set by Israel and the U.S., and it would enable Israel's policy of maintaining what they refer to as security control of the region. But the major problem with the proposal is that Palestinian representatives were not included in the talks. In response, Palestinians held protests in the West Bank and in Gaza, where some were seen burning posters of Trump's face with messages like, "Trump, keep your deal, Palestine is not yours to sell." The Prime Minister of Palestine has already indicated that he will reject the deal, arguing the U.S. is not credible or genuine as a peace broker in this process. Meanwhile, the timing of this announcement is notable as the U.S. Senate begins day 7 of its impeachment trial for President Trump here in Washington. Netanyahu has been formally indicted in 3 separate corruption cases on charges of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust after he withdrew his request for immunity hours before his press conference with Trump. But while Israel may be in favor of this deal, many see this as just another sign of the U.S. enabling Israel's behavior in the Middle East. Under the Trump administration alone, the U.S. abandoned a 2-state solution in February 2017. It recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel in December 2017. It then cut off funding for Palestinians in August 2018, and it recognized Israeli settlements in the West Bank as legal in November 2019. The Palestinian Authority has now announced an emergency meeting today that will include rivaling factions along with representatives from Hamas, as they all plan to come together in order to reject Trump's deal. Reporting from outside the White House, Rachel Blevins, RT.
Firefighters in Paris have taken to the streets demanding better pay and working conditions from the Macron administration. RT's Charlotte Dubinsky is in the streets, and she filed this report.
A noisy protest here in Paris as firefighters take to the streets once again in a protest now that's been going on for almost 7 months. A protest against the reforms in the civil service announced by President Macron in 2017. This included 120,000 job losses over 3 years, and also anger over what they say is the lack of recognition in their job, saying it's a risky profession and they want to be recognised just like the police. Just give you a sense of what's going on here in Paris, where the firefighters have come from across France to try and get their voices heard by the government. They say that they desperately need a massive recruitment drive They need assistance because they say that the number of call-outs that they're receiving is increasing every year, and they don't have the staff to cover it. We've been speaking to some of the firefighters at this protest to ask them a bit more about the problems they're receiving in their profession.
Why are we protesting for 7 months? Because we've had no response from the administration or from the government. There are two problems. Firstly, our work involves a high level of risk, and this should be factored in.
Between 2010 to 2018, firefighters have faced an increase in the number of verbal and physical attacks against them. Our police colleagues get more because of the greater risk they face, and we're demanding an increase also.
We are facing a shortage of personnel. That's partly because departments are having their budgets slashed.
So in terms of attacks on firefighters, there are no specific figures just for them, but there are figures for all emergency crews, so that's firefighters, police officers and ambulance workers. Back in August of last year, those attacks were said to have reached a record high, with many people claiming that there is a problem luring firefighters or the police into a situation and then attacking them. In fact, there were some 110 assaults or attacks being recorded every single day, and throughout the year those attacks reached over 23,000. So that's some of the reasons why the firefighters say that they deserve to have a risk premium just like the police are paid. They're out on the streets again in Paris, hoping that this time their voices will be heard by the government. Charlotte Dubensky for RT in Paris.
And now this, EU gun manufacturers may be fueling Mexico's drug violence. According to Mexico's Secretariat of National Defense, 1 in 3 firearms smuggled into the country come from Europe. RT's Alex Mihailovich has the story.
Illegal guns smuggled into Mexico from the U.S. Weapons like these can be blamed for many of the cartel killings south of the border. In all, there were 35,000 homicides in Mexico last year. But a study from Armament Research Services shows that it's not only American-made guns that are making it into the hands of the cartels. Nearly a third of the 2 million guns smuggled into Mexico in the past decade are from Europe. Legally and illegally, weapons from munitions factories in EU nations like Austria, Belgium, Italy, Romania, Spain, and the UK are making their way to Mexico. Serbia, a non-EU state, is also a contributor. According to the Campaign Against Arms Trade, in 2018, EU member states licensed $136 million worth of arms exports to Mexico. Since 2018, the UK alone has exported $6 million worth of weapons to Mexico, including $3.6 million in small arms. When talking about legal guns, European manufacturers arm Mexico's soldiers and police, but these weapons make their way to the drug cartels as well. Licensed exports from Europe are perfectly legal, but knowing whom the end user is, well, that's another story. Post-delivery checks of legal guns are not part of the equation, never mind the thousands of illegally smuggled firearms. One thing we know is no matter what the route, guns are ending up with the bad guys. For example, corrupt Mexican Navy members are said to be connected to the infamous Los Zetas cartel. And in 2018, Mexican officials revealed that nearly 5,000 guns were stolen from that country's police in the preceding 5 years. Legal and illegal, Europe's guns are everywhere in Mexico. Mexico's Secretariat of National Defense data shows that out of 116,560 guns seized from Europe and the U.S. between the years of 2010 and 2018, 5 European brands made the top 20, with Italy's Beretta leading the EU list. In fact, United Nations Comtrade data shows that Italy exported 3 times more handguns to Mexico than the U.S. in 2018. Although it looks like European gun manufacturers have no qualms about contributing to the bloodbath on Mexican soil, their reckless profits in that part of the world are facing resistance. This past October, Mexico's foreign minister unveiled Operation Frozen, a joint initiative between the U.S. and Mexico to stop the traffic of arms. Sources say a similar agreement between the EU and Mexico is likely, and Europeans seem to be supportive of measures to stop the flow from the EU. Last year, German gunmaker Heckler & Koch was fined an equivalent of $4.8 million when assault rifles from that company were illegally diverted to Mexico. In addition, post-delivery controls that ensure the guns are going to the right people seem to be catching on in Europe. For the news with Rick Sanchez, I'm Alex Mihailovich.
Hillary Clinton playing the blame game again. This time she's blaming Facebook for the rise of Donald Trump and says the company is, quote, not just going to re-elect Trump, but intends to re-elect Trump. RT's Donald Corder explains.
She lost the primaries in 2008. She lost the election in 2016, despite having nearly every advantage. Now, Hillary Clinton's making excuses for the next presidential Democratic ticket ahead of the game, preemptively pinning the blame on Facebook.
Facebook is not just going to re-elect Trump, but intends to re-elect Trump. This is a global company that has huge influence in ways that we're only beginning to understand.
Trumpian conspiracies might be a big external threat to the Democrats and Clinton's world, but she's got more shade to throw at forces from within her own party, like the socialist sensation from Vermont.
He was in Congress 4 years. He had one senator support him. Nobody likes him. Nobody wants to work with him. He got nothing done.
Then there's the new Democratic presidential candidate on the block, Tulsi Gabbard. Clinton thinks she could be in bed with Washington's favorite boogeyman, the Russians.
They've got their eye on somebody who's currently in the Democratic primary and are grooming her to be the third-party candidate. She's a favorite of the Russians. They have a bunch of sites and bots and other ways of supporting her so far.
There sure is a lot of blaming going on surrounding an election that hasn't even happened yet, but it's no secret Clinton's got an axe to grind. She's been blaming anyone but herself ever since she lost the election in 2016.
I was on the way to winning until the combination of Jim Comey's letter on October 28th and Russian WikiLeaks. I inherit nothing from the Democratic Party.
What do you mean nothing?
I mean, it was bankrupt. It was on the verge of insolvency. The voter suppression that we now know had been in the works and really put into effect. And then let's not forget sexism and misogyny.
Why can't she let go of her losing? There you go again, thinking that she's hanging on to the fact that she lost a rigged election. There you go again, thinking that she cannot understand that she was simply voted out, or that America said no. Don't you understand that it's natural for somebody who is elevated to this self-exalted role of the obvious candidate to believe that there was a conspiracy, Russian hacking, Russian involvement, Facebook, Zuckerberg. Now, I always thought, and many people I know thought that he was part of the deep state, that he was on her side. He's against her?
But if you think she's the past, think again. The DNC just released its 2020 committee nominees, those responsible for the party's ideological future. And the vast majority are connected in one way or another to the defeated Clinton. Carol Browner, appointed to the DNC in 2016 by Clinton, Bakari Sellers, a surrogate for Hillary Clinton in 2016, Craig Smith, senior advisor to Clinton's campaign, and let's not forget John Podesta, the controversial chairman of the Clinton campaign itself, whose alleged emails back in 2016 shed light on the inner workings of the Clinton clan. It's clear the Clinton agenda lives on. She doesn't even need to run for president again. Although, would you be really surprised if she did?
What's happening right now is you're seeing the old school DNC that Nancy Pelosi has been trying to control, fighting against this new left move. There's a lot of progressives and young people who want to see, who have no interest in Joe Biden. But if you say, who are the DNC? Who are Democrats today?
NASA has chosen a company to build a private hotel on the International Space Station. It'll be called the Von Braun Rotating Space Station, named after the Nazi scientist turned NASA director, Wernher von Braun. RT's Saya Tavenger has the latest on this new space hotel.
Where have you planned to go this year? Paris, on an Africa safari? Well, what about space? Because starting this year, NASA will allow tourists to visit the International Space Station. And until now, the floating space station has only been accessible to astronauts. But now space tourists can enjoy a holiday abroad, the International Space Station, with padded pods and panoramic views of Earth for up to 30 days. And this could be yours as long as you can afford the $35,000 price tag per night, because after all, keeping astronauts on board the International Space Station is a very hefty business. For instance, the regenerative life support and toilet will cost about $11,000 per tourist each day, and things like food and air will cost about $20,000 per tourist each day. But being super rich is not enough. You'll still have to pass NASA's rigorous health checks and training procedures. But what exactly is the International Space Station? Here's what you need to know. The International Space Station is a large spacecraft that orbits Earth and houses astronauts who go up there to complete scientific missions. Now, many countries work together to build it, and they work together to use it. And it's made up of many pieces which astronauts actually had to send up individually on rockets and then put together from the year 1998 to 2000. Now, ever since year 2000, people have lived on the International Space Station, and NASA uses the station to learn about living and working in space. And it's approximately 250 miles above Earth and orbits around the planet just like a satellite. And living inside the International Space Station is said to be like living inside a big house with 5 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a gym, lots of science labs, and a big bay window for viewing Earth. Now, these photos reveal the concept that NASA is using to build the first ever private habitat module for the International Space Station. And the Earth Observatory can be seen poking out from bottom of the module, where this almost sci-fi looking pod will let you get full 360 degrees of planet Earth. This module pod was designed as a comfortable and friendly egg, where it features a cushioned interior and hundreds of small LEDs that provide optimal lighting and color. But it's actually not NASA building this first commercial module. Houston-based startup Axiom won the bid to create the capsule after a competition that offered private companies access to the International Space Station to develop private facilities of their own. The company has signed with NASA in a 5-year base performance period, along with 2-year option. And if everything goes according to plan, the International Space Station, which has been a collaboration largely between Russians and Americans, may be privatized by the year 2024. In Washington, Saya Tavenger, RT.
Okay, that's our news. We'll see you right here tomorrow evening. And don't forget to check out our new app, Portable TV. You can find it at portable.tv or on any app store. We'll see you soon.